Okay.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Well, welcome everyone.
Brenda, let's give it a couple minutes. They're still popping in.
We're just
And I was
popping in.
thinking,
Okay. You give me the cue.
Okay, I will.
Brenda, if there is a question, also I can see you if you want to raise your finger
Oh,
your hand
good.
up or something. Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
I
Yes.
can see your face. I just can't see the question.
Great.
Brenda, did you go to the lake for the weekend?
Yes, we did. It was nice. It was a little
Yeah.
chilly, but
Yeah.
it's nice just to get out of town and
Yeah.
be
Good.
outside.
Good.
Yeah. How about you?
I was here and yeah, it was nice. It was nice. Some years we've worn a goose down on Memorial Weekend, right? It's been
I know.
cold, so it was
Really.
nice. Yeah, it's
It's
good.
always hit or miss.
Yeah.
Monday was nice.
Yes, it was. And a couple weeks ago, I went to Lisbon with a couple of girlfriends, and we went to a greenhouse down there because my friend knows the owners. And
Oh, nice.
I hadn't been on interstate for, weeks. Anyway, that was fun just to
Great, yes.
drive faster than 35. It was,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it just feels good to get out of town.
yeah, fun, fun to see.
Okay, I think we will get started. So welcome everyone that's online. One of these, hopefully sooner than later, we'll be able to all get together in person. But for now, welcome. It's my pleasure to introduce Robin Swanson with Superior Insurance. Robin has been with Superior Insurance for 10 years. So just a little background on Robin. She lived in Grand Forks and graduated from Red River High. Woo-hoo. They went to nursing school and became a registered nurse. I don't know if anybody knew that about Robin. Robin also worked at Cass County Electric for 4 years before becoming an insurance agent. So I am glad to welcome Robin. Just a couple of reminders. There's a question and answer on the bottom of your screen. So you can just ask the questions, and then maybe after the presentation, or if it's something that we should go over right away, I'll just interrupt Robin and we can ask questions at that time. Robin said if you have some specific information that you want, she'd be glad to send it to your office or in an email after the fact. So anyway, take it away, Robin.
Thank you. So I can't see anyone except Brenda. So so anyway, I'll just look at my screen and at the slides, and then Brenda will alert me. But thanks for being here when you could be golfing on this gorgeous day. So thank you so much. I know some of you are have been in real estate a long time, and some might be newer to real estate. So we are calling this the ABCs because we're going to talk about like the general questions that we get. And then if you've got, as Brenda said, if you've got more specific things or an address or something you want me to check, then we could do that offline. So we're going to kind of talk about the highlights of the questions that we usually get at the office from agents or from lenders. So, okay, here we go. So when people are asking for flood insurance, or they're buying a house, we will ask everyone if they want flood insurance, if they want an umbrella policy, or if they want life insurance. And a lot of times the clients will say, we don't need flood insurance, we don't live by the river. And so it's sort of a misconception that that is how we will be flooded. And of course, we've experienced that with in 97 and here in 2009 and 8, 9. So anyway, but these are the definitions of a flood. So anywhere it can rain, it can flood. Last year in September or August, actually, I went to Sioux Falls and it was flooding in Sioux Falls. The Sanford down there got flooded. There were houses flooded. Like, who would think in August that you would experience a flood? Then in Grand Forks, it flooded in September. And I think a lot of people would think Grand Forks has got, they got their dike, they took care of things, it's not going to flood in Grand Forks. There were houses that had 4 feet of water in their lower level. So if it rains too much, too fast, the drains can't handle it, and we can have a flood. People that lived through the Minot flood, Bismarck flood a few years ago, some people won't go without flood insurance because maybe their parents experienced it or they lived through it. And the rest of us that don't take it when we don't have to have it, we're sort of gambling, which is what insurance is. You either buy it and hope you never use it, or or you hope you have it if you need it in that case. But so that is a flood. So we're going to talk about the definitions of things that we'll be referring to. And if you guys want to take like a snapshot, use your camera, your phone, and take a picture of some of this stuff, if it will be helpful to you. So we'll talk a lot about NFIP, and if you're newer to real estate, you might not even know what some of these definitions actually mean because there's so many acronyms. But so the NFIP will refer to, again, the National Flood Insurance Program. There has been legislation talking about every year, every couple of years that might go away. So far, it has not. So we'll hear like things from Washington, D.C. about the NFIP. LOMA, the Letter of Map Amendment. So if an address has been put into the high-risk flood zone erroneously, you can get a LOMA, Letter of Map Amendment, that we can tell the insurance company, we don't need flood insurance anymore, here's our LOMA. Or the Letter of Map Revision. If houses are being built in a new development, they might be, they're probably flood proofing the basements, bringing in a lot of backfill, that kind of stuff. Then we can present a LOMAR, it's called. And then the special flood hazard area, we'll talk a lot about that. What a preferred risk policy is. You guys would understand replacement cost versus market value. That's another thing that people will say, you know, I can get 280,000 for my bi-level from 1970 or whatever that's got 1,400 square feet. Well, let's say our market is really hot. So yes, you can get a really great price for that. But what insurance companies are interested in is replacement cost. So that's when it comes to your home insurance, and it also comes for flood insurance. But also, like a lot of times our clients are concerned because of the market value. Also, when you're paying $275 for your house, your lot might be $20,000 or $30,000. So the replacement cost on the structure or the dwelling, of course, wouldn't necessarily be the market price. And then actual cash value, we'll refer to that again later, but that would be like with your car. When you buy a car, you get off the lot and it's not worth what it was when you left. So things that are depreciated. So you want full replacement cost when you're getting regular home insurance, and we'll talk about that when it comes to flood insurance, what the difference is. An EC is an elevation certificate, and we've got some choices now. It used to be that if you were in a high risk special flood hazard area, that you had to have an elevation certificate in order to buy flood insurance. And now we've got some options, which is awesome because it's expensive to get an elevation certificate. And then those are just a couple of websites for you. The bottom one is, I think we ended up attaching that document maybe to the email, but that bottom one from FEMA is specific to realtors that was on their website. It's pretty vague, but nonetheless, it is for real estate agents. And there's also another one, mdresponse.gov, I think is another one that the state has put out. Okay, so the flood zones that, that we hear about in our office every day, and you guys will as you're selling houses, the ones in the blue are the preferred risk policy, the PRP zones. So if you have X, B, or C, they will not require flood insurance, usually. And we'll talk about that. But so that's always good news. If people call us or email us and say, hey, can you check this address for me? Can you tell me the zone determination on this address? When we run that report for them, if it comes up, usually it's an X in our area. If it comes up an X, it's like great news. You know, it doesn't look like this is going to require flood insurance. But as always, check with your lender, because they are the last word on that. And then the ones that are in red are the ones that are in the special flood hazard area. So it's an A, AE, there's all kinds of A's, several A's. Any combination with an A in front of it means you're probably gonna need flood insurance, or if it has a V. The other thing, sorry, side note on that X, B, or C, is I just learned this week that there is a D zone that doesn't require flood insurance, but we don't see that around here. But that was brand new. But anyway, so if you, for your own records, if you want to, the X, B, and C is a question I get asked a lot. And if you see that, you can be pretty confident you're not going to need flood insurance for that property. And I know sometimes on the listing, it'll say in a flood hazard zone, and then maybe we run the address for the client, the realtor, and then we find that our zone determination says it doesn't. And so then you can take that to the lender also and see what they say. Okay, so over 40% of the claims in North Dakota were in an X zone. So it's kind of back to anywhere it can rain, it can flood. And this last year, I went to a FEMA meeting in Fargo. They said the fall of 2019 in our area was the wettest fall on record. So, you know, a lot of times where you got the third highest temperature, whatever. But anyway, it was the wettest fall. So there was a lot of talk about possibly flooding this spring, like depending on how much snow we got, how was the melt gonna go? And there were a lot of people that were in an X zone that did buy flood insurance this spring because they were concerned that even though I don't have to have it, I'm not in a high risk flood area, what if it floods? Anyway, and 40% is a pretty high number, I think. Okay, so why buy flood insurance? I also will get, sometimes a client will call me and say, my lender said that you're gonna make me buy flood insurance, like as an insurance agent. And I've even had some lenders say to me that the government's making their clients buy flood insurance. But it is the investor that owns the home, that holds the loan with the client, that is determining if you need to buy flood insurance. So FEMA doesn't care if you have flood insurance. The NFIP doesn't care if you have flood insurance. They provide flood insurance, but it's the investor that co-owns the house with you. So does that make sense? So that's why we will say, this is what we found when we ran 3212 Polk Street, that it is in an X zone. But as always, check with your lender. Because if the map shows that the water is on the property, the land, but not touching the house, if it's 2 feet from the house, is it 4 feet from the house? Is it a half a foot? You know, it could be that that investor would still say, we want this house to have flood insurance. So anyway, that's why we always say, but check with your lender. So it could be the reasons you're going to buy flood insurance is because you're buying a house that's in an area that is a special flood hazard area in an ARV zone, and the lender has said you need to have flood insurance. That would be something that if it's even questionable, to find out ahead of time, which you guys do a great job of that as realtors. But we have had some situations where people are ready to close, and then all of a sudden the lender will say, oh shoot, this house needs flood insurance. And we are scrambling because the flood insurance the first year usually needs to be paid out of pocket. Seems like the next year it can be escrowed, but somehow the first year, and I don't understand the lending world. But so all of a sudden before closing, if the client's needing to come up with $800 or $1,100 or something they weren't expecting, it gets a little stressful. So that would be something when they are with their lender that they could ask right away if there's any, just to triple check, because maybe it's not on your disclosure, it's not on the map that we're seeing, I'm not seeing it either, but somehow that particular investor wants flood insurance so that there aren't any surprises in the end. So we've had 2 of those that have been just scrambling at the end, and yeah, it was a tough deal. But another reason that you might get flood insurance is because you want it, and that's like what we talked about. People that have experienced it, maybe had family that experienced a flood. I have a young couple that both sets of their parents lived in Minot, and they buy flood insurance every year in Fargo, and because their parents experienced it was pretty devastating, and it was pretty surprising too. Actually, it came up so quickly in Minot. And then a third reason might be because your homeowner's policy doesn't cover it. And it's kind of interesting that there are a lot of people that still don't know. They might assume that their sump pump coverage would cover flood, or their sewer backup endorsement on their house would cover flood on their home policy. And it doesn't. And even those two, that endorsement isn't automatic on your home policy either. So that's, we don't want to assume anything, but we do have one company now that we offer that has flood insurance on the home policy. We can add it. So that's like amazing and brand new. So they will allow us to have, like if you have 40,000 in sump pump coverage or 20,000, you can have that amount in flood insurance also. So that's pretty awesome, because sometimes people don't, if you don't have to have it, you don't want necessarily a $250,000 policy. Like you don't think you need it for the whole dwelling. You might just be concerned about your furnace or something. So that's kind of neat. Okay, so that's some policies now do offer the flood insurance like we talked about. So now we'll talk about the difference between the NFIP flood policies and the private flood insurance. So this is the 3 types of flood insurance now that we can get, right? We can get it on your home policy if you have a certain carrier, and then NFIP, and then the private flood. So NFIP policies are government backed. It used to be like years ago that they were the only policy that was available. So it was on a grid. So if you wanted coverage for a $200,000 house, it was going to be $325. If you wanted coverage for $250,000 house, it was going to be $375. And you couldn't shop it. It wasn't competitive. It was all government priced, government backed. And so it didn't matter where you got it. That was an NFIP flood policy. If it's an optional policy, it was very affordable, like those numbers I just said, and you did not have to have an elevation certificate. If you were buying a home in a special flood hazard area, and you needed an elevation certificate now because you have to have flood insurance, and this is the only option you have, it was very expensive. You have to pay, like we're using More Engineering a lot. They would go out and do, and it was like $800, I think, for an elevation certificate. And then we could use their numbers, plug them in to the NFIP program, and then we would produce an elevation or a flood policy based specifically on your address. And the reason that people did want to get an elevation certificate, of course, for one thing, you had to have one, but also each house has just slightly different topography. So you could have 4 houses in a row and they could all potentially have different flood insurance costs. Probably wouldn't be dramatic, but there is an area in West Fargo, kind of behind Blarney Stone. There's a bunch of townhomes back there, and it's kind of crazy. Like there's a driveway that I noticed. It sits, that's actually like a small hill, it seems like, from one driveway to the next. So it's like those two would very obviously have different elevation certificates, because one, it just looks like the water is going to drain right down to their slab house, actually. But anyway, so that was what NFIP was like. We had to have an elevation certificate if you were in a special flood hazard area. And if you were not, you just wanted to have the insurance, it was a set price. Now we have access to private flood insurance carriers, and those can be pretty competitive. So if you're in a special flood hazard area, now we only have, I think it's 12 questions we have to answer. And with the NFIP, we have 60, and they require photos, and it's like very, very involved. So if you have to have flood insurance, we prefer to go to the private flood carrier because it's a lot easier for the client, and it's can move very quickly. The NFIP flood policies, there's a 30-day wait. To, like, if it's an optional, like I just think it might flood this spring, I'm going to buy my policy. I have to buy it 30 days before I think the event will happen. If it's for a mandated policy, a standard flood policy, then we can close anytime because the lender is requiring it. But 30-day wait on the NFIP, 15-day wait on the private flood insurance, usually. And again, unless the lender is saying we have to have this now. The private flood insurance has been accepted. I think that used to be maybe a VA loan that wasn't accepted, but now I actually think it is. So we haven't had a lot of issues as far as the investor goes with accepting that, but that'd be another thing if people are shopping, like kind of get their ducks in a row so that there aren't any surprises, that we could use the private flood insurance. That's going to make life a lot easier. It's going to go more quickly, and it's a lot less expensive usually. So now we've had lenders who have been like, if people are coming into refinance or something and the clients have an NFIP policy they had to have. Let's say it was $1,800 or $2,400. We've had some lenders that have called us and asked us to run the flood insurance in a private flood carrier because maybe we can save them money there also. So it's awesome. It's really great. We've had one private flood insurance. It's called NFS Edge. Like the carriers in town are all different, but, and now we got another one called CATCO, and they're even less expensive. And they're both backed by Lloyd's of London, if you've heard of them. So that's a reinsurer, is Lloyd's of London, a very big organization, and they are been accepted by lenders. So that's really, really cool. So now we've gone from not having any competition to competition. On the NFIP policies, I have had people call though and say, hey, I heard you have private flood insurance. I'm paying $575 or $775. Can I get mine for less with the private insurance? And usually it is not for people that have been grandfathered in. So if you had it's kind of confusing, but if you had an NFIP policy that was in an X zone, and then when we remapped a few years ago, you got pulled into an A zone in Fargo. I think there were like 20,000 homes or something that got pulled in. Then you can, your price was going up like 10%, 15%, 18%. It was going to go up every year, they told us, for a few years. So now let's say you're up to $775 because they've been slowly raising your price. If I'm going to quote you in a private flood insurance company, I have to use your new zone, the A zone. Whereas if your NFIP policy that you've kept, they're still letting you rate off of an X zone with this increase. So it isn't penciling out to move most people to private flood from a grandfathered NFIP. We can check that out. You know, obviously we'd run it for you if you want to check, but does that make sense? Everybody okay? Okay. And the deductibles on the NFIP are $2,000, $5,000, or $10,000. And those are also then, of course, determined by the lender, what they will accept. The private flood deductibles are $2,000 or $5,000. NFIP used to be $1,250. You could do it $1,250 or $2,000. And then on the NFIP policy, the dwelling coverage or the structure coverage goes up to $250,000 for the dwelling. And there's some ratio, something or other that the lenders use. And so even if you have a $600,000 house, usually the $250,000 is acceptable. And I don't understand their ratios, but with the private flood insurance, their dwelling amount will go up to $750,000. So we've got some really nice houses around here. I've got some people that are taking, you know, they want more coverage than $250,000. When we were concerned about flooding like this spring, and then also when we knew that some of the homes in Fargo were going to get remapped, there was suggestion that people just buy a small NFIP policy, because we didn't have access to the private flood yet, at least most of us. So they were suggesting buy a small NFIP policy, even for $20,000 in dwelling coverage, and then you would be able to get grandfathered, and you could always increase your dwelling amount. So if you didn't want to spend the $500 or whatever at that time, you could spend, it was maybe $200, I don't remember. But at least you'd have a policy in place, and then it would grandfather. So then if later it was like your lenders said, yep, you got moved into this zone, now we have to have enough of the coverage to cover your loan amount, you would be able to raise that up at any time. And you'd be able to keep that grandfather, that X zone that got moved to an A zone, compared to not buying anything and now you're shopping. Then you might have been quoted as just an A zone because you got moved. So if that makes sense. Okay, so, but for people that, like this spring, there were some people that just wanted to buy a policy because they were concerned, but they weren't all in. So we did have some people that bought it like a $20,000 policy. In that case, if your home is replacement cost is $200,000, let's say, and you bought a $20,000 policy, that would only be 10% of your replacement cost coverage. So then the coverage that they would get from their flood policy would be actual cash value. It would be depreciated. So you have to have 80% coverage, 80% of your replacement cost for your dwelling in coverage in order to get replacement cost coverage. Is that confusing, or you got it, Brenda?
I think everybody's got it. There's any
Okay.
questions?
Okay, good. So, all right. Okay, so on the private, we've got no elevation certificate required. We've got very few questions. You can get up to 750,000 in coverage. And actually, yeah, up to 750,000 in coverage, and there's only a 15-day wait unless the lender needs it right away. Okay, so next, let's see what my next, because my slides aren't. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So what we talked about, sorry, my slides aren't numbered and my notes are numbered because sorry about that. So on the NFIP, like we talked about, there's the standard policy, the ones that you have to have flood insurance for according to the lender, A or V zoned policies, or the preferred risk policy. You just choose to have it. You can get those both from NFIP. Usually it's more affordable to get your preferred risk policy through NFIP than it is through the private insurance. The private is really geared more for people that have to have it. Okay, so we've talked about those two. Now for the excess insurance, and a lot of people didn't know that that's available. It's available on top of either the NFIP or the private insurance. And you can get excess insurance of 5 million, up to 5 million. And then actually there's a cap of up to 15 million. So of course there's other places that in the country that there are estates and, you know, humongous homes. And anyway, so that's pretty amazing. You can get excess insurance up to 5 million. And I have had people that have got high value homes that have done that. They have bought, if they got the NFIP for 250,000, then they might buy this policy for 300,000. One person has a piano that's 150,000. So he wanted contents coverage for flood, and we can talk about that. But anyway, so he wanted more coverage. They've just got some nice things. I mean, a nice home, really nice home. Okay, then there's something called flood wrap insurance, which is like a gap insurance. So that will cover things that are like outdoor property. So usually like your deck isn't covered, your retaining wall wouldn't be covered. If you had a golf cart, trailers park, that kind of thing, usually those things would not be covered. And also the flood wrap will give you additional living expense. So kind of like on your home insurance policy, that's called like loss of use. So if you got displaced from your home because of a fire or tornado or something that's covered on your regular home insurance, if you are displaced, it's not safe for you to stay in your home. You'll have money available to rent an apartment or stay in a hotel until you get rebuilt and it's safe for you to be back in your home. So anyway, this flood wrap will provide something like that with your flood insurance because it's not offered. It's not on the NFIP policy or the private policy. You're not going to get that additional living expense. Another thing I was thinking about with flood insurance that I do hear sometimes that people will say, I'm not going to get flood insurance. It doesn't cover anything anyway. And there are two attachments I believe that you would have gotten from Patty. One is about what is covered on the NFIP policy. And then there's one that's what's covered on the private insurance. And then also there's a lot of FAQs on the private insurance. It's really, really great information, especially on that private insurance one. But the private insurance coverages really mirror the NFIP. So, so that's neat. It's not like, yeah, we're paying less and then, but darn it, they didn't cover our foundation. It's like they do. So they're mirroring each other. It's just, there's now some competition. So that's kind of neat. But anyway, we'll get to that on our screen. So what does flood insurance cover? And these are just a few things. There are others, but I just put the bigger things on here because obviously if your foundation, there's so much water pressure and your foundation caves in, it's like you're going to get your $800 back or your $500 back or your $1,600 back, whatever it is that you had to pay for your flood policy. So that's a big one. Electrical and plumbing systems, your furnace in the basement, we know just your furnace can be what, $6,000, air conditioners, furnace unit, whatever. If you've got air exchanger, that kind of stuff, water heater. Anyway, so those are big items and those are covered under your building. And like we talk about with regular home insurance, like what defines your building and what defines your contents. So if you turn your house upside down and shake it, anything that falls down would be contents, personal property, and anything that sticks, that stays attached is your building. So on your regular home also, a lot of people probably think of their flat screen TV, they think of their electronics, like when it comes to personal property and what they have covered, and your furniture. But it's like also, when you think about in your garage, you've got bicycles, lawnmowers, there's a lot of things, tools, a lot of things that we store in our garages also that would all fall down. It's all considered personal property. And we do recommend like videoing what you have. Open up your cabinet doors, your drawers, just now it's so easy with our phones, but just take video. And it's very, very helpful. We've had a couple people that have had thefts and they didn't have any, like the insurance company didn't question them when they were reporting what was missing, but they couldn't remember, like, did I have 4 of those or 3 of those when it came to tools and that kind of stuff. So it's just a great idea because it's a traumatic event. If you have a fire, a tornado, a theft, a flood, it's traumatic. So if you've got that video, it's very, very helpful. And even if your closet isn't cleaned up, you're still going to be able to have a little inventory of what you've got. And then the contents coverage. These are the basic things that are covered in the basement. And now this gets a little tricky because if you've got a bi-level, like it's with flood insurance, like they're calling that like a finished space. You know, they're not really calling that a basement. It's like a finished lower area. So when it comes to flood insurance and like what's covered in the basement, that would be if you have to have flood insurance, great, video what you've got, because then when it comes to your lower level, you'll have all your documentation. So, because in other areas, they don't even know what a bi-level is. Like they, you know, like even when it comes to regular home insurance, when we have questions, the people that work in Ohio or whatever, they don't know what we're talking about. But anyway, there are houses that are on stilts in some places. There are houses that are, as we know, crawl space. There's so many different basement and then sub-level. They've got all these different scenarios. So I'm just thinking, if you buy a flood policy, you don't have to have one. Awesome. You believed in it anyway. Video your lower level. If you have to have it, video your lower level. Video everything so that you've got your documentation. But these are the things that we know are covered in a basement. But there are things like if your carpet is on a finish, like if you have a subfloor in your lower level, like maybe you would have in a bi-level compared to a concrete floor, an unfinished floor, and you put carpet on it, it's like that's where there gets to be some technicalities about if it's covered or not covered. So if it's on a subfloor and it's permanently attached, or is it on concrete? But it's like, that's really not a huge concern to me because I'm concerned about my furnace and my walls and my water heater and the things that are bigger. And if we have a flood, you had your video, and so it'll all be documented. It'll be good.
Mhm.
So you could tell your clients that anyway. I mean, I think that would be a nice, like if you want to value add, like they're excited about moving into their house. It might be the neatest that everything is when you're putting it away the first time. And it's like, that's something that we suggest to people, but that'd be something that would be great if you guys wanted some little value add that you could tell them. This is a great time to document all your possessions. You don't have to write them down and what the value is, but if there's a serial number, you could take a video of that, and that would be great. Okay. And this is what we talked about earlier, how much coverage does your client need? And then again, this is about what the lender investor requires. Also, there are some banks that now will let us, if you're paying your mortgage down and you only have flood insurance because you have to have it, it's not that you super believe in it. As you pay your mortgage down, we can lower your flood amount because the lender will now allow that. So if you had a $250,000 loan, we had a $250,000 policy. Now you're at 221 on your mortgage. We can lower your policy to 221 if the lender agrees to that and you want that. So it's not a huge difference in price, but it's something that we used to be able to do with a couple of banks, but now I think most of the banks are letting people do that. So, and then I think we went over this earlier. Okay, now this is also for you guys especially, that can a flood policy be transferred? I have had some realtors write and say, can you give us a quote? There is a policy for this address, but it can't be transferred. So I don't know when that is because I haven't run into that yet. I've had that question, I've had that request, but I haven't had that happen to me, but it could be, it might be out there. So I'm saying most flood policies can be transferred because that's been my experience. So obviously it can be transferred between the seller and the buyer or to the buyer. So the transfer must be done before the closing. And I think that if you've got a contract, things are moving in the right direction, it would seem that it would be something good just to get done ahead of time once you know your closing date, or we could even leave that blank. But it just would seem like you could get your signatures, kind of get that part done. And then if it doesn't happen, we rip it up. If the deal falls through, we just rip it up. Nothing will actually happen until the closing, but we can have that intent, have everything signed that says it's going to happen, but it has to happen before closing. And we need the signature from the seller. So it would be, I, Brenda Martinson, live at 123 Happy Way. I'm transferring my policy number to Robin Swanson on, June 1st. So Brenda will sign that. I actually don't even have to sign it, but whatever. But anyway, we need Brenda to sign that. And then you want to get a copy to the current insurance agent that's on the policy, because they're not going to have Brenda at that address anymore. And then you would also, of course, give it to the buyer. And then I don't know if you have to have that at closing, or anyway, the realtor usually takes care of that for me. So I'm not sure if it's at the title, when you're doing your title transaction. But anyway, but it just seems like it's another thing you could get done ahead of time. And so that at the end, there's not a lot of chaos. And again, if it doesn't happen, then we just rip it up.
Question, Robin, is there a form? Did we at one time have a form that we could just fill out?
That was so crazy because with all the government forms, they're there wasn't one, then there was one. Well, now we've got different companies, you know, with private insurance, and so you can transfer any of them. So they really don't care as long as, I mean, we could handwrite it even.
Okay.
But usually I will type something up for people if they can, you know, if it's like if I have the buyer, then as long as the seller is providing the policy number, of course, like I'll type it up for my client. Or if it's the seller, it's really easy because I have the policy number. But yeah, I know it would seem like, and I think NFIP maybe did come up with a form, but now that we have, you know, it says NFIP on it. So now that we have the private ones, we just kind of create something.
Okay.
So, and that's another thing, if we get it soon enough, then if they're, you know, we can run it by the new company or the company that we're going to transfer from and just say, do we have everything we need, so that we make sure that it happens.
Okay, good.
But yeah, good question. Okay, then can you transfer a policy to a different agency? And yes, you can. So now Brenda has her insurance at, let's just say, Bremer Bank, and she's going to transfer to me, and I have mine at Superior. So now I've got a Bremer Bank flood policy with, you know, because now I've taken over her policy that she's transferring. It's now in my name at Bremer Bank. I would like to have everything at Superior, just so I have everything under one roof. So then at renewal, I now own that policy. At renewal, then I can roll that over to Superior, so I have everything under one roof. You can, of course, keep it at Bremer and have one policy over there and your other policy somewhere else. You can do that, but you can transfer it within agencies also, and nothing changes. Doesn't affect your mortgage or anything. And also, if Brenda paid for her policy in full in March, and now she sold her home in September, and let's say you don't have to have the flood policy, you just did it because you wanted to, you could get your money back because you're selling it. You could get a prorated amount back, and you could just cancel your policy with NFIP, or you can transfer it to these people, the new, to me, the buyer, and then I get to keep it until March. And then at that time I could decide if I'm going to renew it. Okay. Any questions on that?
No, nobody has didn't ask for any questions. So
Okay. It's so exciting. Nobody can stand it, right?
just gonna, explaining it.
Okay. Okay. And can a flood policy be canceled? And yes, it can. So it can be canceled if the home is paid off, because now it's, you know, no investor owns it with you. So it's your decision completely. Can be canceled if there's a LOMA or a LOMAR that we talked about earlier. And if the NFIP policy is $1,800 and you've found out that you can get private flood insurance for $1,300, NFIP actually was allowing us to like cancel midterm. It was amazing. And then we could buy the new private one, but now they are not. They caught on to that. So now we can only cancel that or non-renew it. So we wouldn't pay the renewal for the NFIP, and then we'd have the private one ready to buy the same day, of course, that the NFIP one would expire. And that would be something that you would, we would absolutely need to talk to the bank about, just, you know, give them a heads up that that's what's happening, that you're going to cancel the NFIP and you're going to buy the private one. Also for the canceling, sometimes when people have a builder's risk, they're building a home, sometimes the builder will, I don't quite understand how this all works, but the builder will have the client buy a flood policy, or the builder will buy a flood policy, because until they get the flood-proof basement, the concrete window wells, you know, there's a bunch of stuff they have to do, a certain amount of backfill. Until they get all that done, it's considered to be in a special flood hazard area. So then you have to have a temporary flood policy. So then of course that can be canceled because then you get the LOMAR, but it is prorated. So if you only have your flood policy for 3 months or 4 months or whatever, of course you have to pay for it while you had to have it. And then once it's canceled, then you get 8 months back or whatever, because it's an annual policy. You cannot buy that month to month. So that's kind of a bummer for people, like I said, when they find out, like, what, I have to have flood insurance, and I'm closing on Thursday, and like I have to come up with $1,100. It's tough. You can put it on a credit card, but it is tough because obviously you didn't have that money, or you wanted to buy a new couch or something, and so it's a bummer. And but it's a one-time payment. So that would be another thing right away to ask the lender, is if the first year could be escrowed. Seems like usually it can't be, and I don't understand that, but sometimes it can. But then we have to have the check ahead of time, like we have to have it to buy the policy. So like we can't issue it the day after closing or even on closing. I mean, you won't have the document at closing unless we have the check. So we have to have it ahead of time. So I don't know if that's part of the deal with the lenders. It's like they can't, I don't know. But anyway, it usually falls on the homeowner. And it's Visa or MasterCard you can use, or a check, of course. So, and now people will also write to us and say, hey, we got a LOMAR, we don't need our flood insurance anymore. And they'll maybe attach the LOMAR to us, and that's awesome. But the lender really needs to be involved. So we just have one right now that the lender paid the renewal, the flood renewal. So now and it was escrowed because it's been, they've had the policy for a while, and now they got a LOMAR, and now the lender paid it again, paid the renewal, even though the LOMAR was there, because of course it's getting paid in Ohio or something. And so now the insured's escrow account, they're paying more than they were expecting to pay because they weren't planning on flood insurance again. So now we're needing to, we can't cancel it until we get the lender has to send us something that says it's no longer needed. A LOMAR shows us that it's in the X zone. That's great, but we have to have the lender sign off also, or we have to be in communication with the lender so that, anyway, so the client told them, but somehow they didn't get told, like they told their local lender, I think, and maybe it was because of COVID, but it's too bad because now we can get it canceled. They'll get their money back, full refund, but it's just going to take a little more time because they didn't know necessarily to have their lender give us a letter too, and again, I think a lot was COVID, but so if you have that question, like we can help you up front, like to talk about what we need to have in order to cancel it so that we can just do it, get it done. Okay, and I think that is, wow, yeah. Only an hour. How's everybody doing?
I don't see any questions, Robin, so you did a really great job of explaining things.
They're sleeping. They're sleeping.
So, anybody have questions out there that you'd like to ask Robin?
If the city maps, maybe hopefully people are getting comfortable, with navigating the city maps and all those overlays and everything when you put in an address and you hit the little binoculars and all of that. But if you have an address, you can send it to us and we'll run a quick zone determination for you. We do have one thing now. We used to sell just a one-off. We'd sell a private flood policy for people because of course it helps them get into their home if they can get, instead of paying $1,800 or paying $1,100 or whatever, it helps their ratios. So if Brenda had a client and they had everything at State Farm and State Farm didn't have private flood insurance, for instance, then maybe Brenda would call me and say, hey, can we get them a private policy? We were doing that. And now we have decided that we really want the whole account because we want the whole account instead of just doing one flood policy here and there. So, but we will run the flood determination for you, of course. I know Karen Skold told me somebody was charging like $5 to do that for people, and we aren't charging. We'd love to help you. We'd love to help your clients, but we're not charging. But
Just a question, Robin. Is there any talk about our flood elevation going up? Have you heard anything?
no, because we're still wondering, like, has anybody heard if the diversions, what's going on with the diversion? Things have slowed down. We haven't had, I don't know if I didn't get to go to the last public issues meeting with HBA, I mean, the Zoom meeting, but no, I think, yeah. And even all the levies and everything has like really helped. It's
Right.
really, really helped us. But when I asked the FEMA people, it's like to get remapped, I think takes a while. And I don't know if with the diversion sort of being up in the air or in process, I don't know if they're going to remap us and then remap us.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately. Right.
Hopefully we'll just stay status quo if nothing else.
Right. Right. And yeah. And then, yeah. But yeah, they've done some great things around with all the levies. That's helpful, but it doesn't change the requirement right now in some places.
Good. I see Patty put up your contact information too, Robin.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
if everybody was too afraid to ask a question or didn't think of it, they probably will afterwards and be able to
Right.
reach out to
Yeah.
you.
Yep, that's great. And it's Shannon and Jenna and I are all in our office, or like we're a team. So anyone can help you. And if you've got an address that you want us to run, it's like, you know, my address, I guess, is up there. I can't see it, but Robin at Superior Insurance Agency. So it's Jenna at Superior Insurance Agency or Shannon. So you can write to all of us at the same time if you want, and one of us is going to get back to you. I got a request last night at about 10:30 for an address, so and it was in an X zone, so that was good.
Well, our business is certainly we're clicking right along. So
Exactly,
yeah,
that's right.
with everything going on, it's we haven't skipped a beat. It seems
I know, it's
all
wonderful. It's
on
wonderful.
so that's good.
It is. I know. I'm thankful we can work from home, and yeah, we appreciate it.
Yes. Yeah.
But also there's Steve Sly is at the city. He's a resource. And then I do have a resource with FEMA directly that like I can email this lady. She's must be our kind of our regional rep or something. Like she was at the meeting that I went to. Maybe that was in January or so. I can't exactly remember when that meeting was for the city had. But anyway, so if there's something that is too big for me, we can reach out directly to FEMA too.
One question that you probably would be able to answer, as far as getting a LOMA, an individual, somebody that might be out in, say, St. Benedict, where, you know, they want to just get a LOMA, how do they go about doing that?
I would first, I know that's tough because when it's in the rural, right? Or in a smaller area, but if they can try like in Mapleton and stuff too, it's
Right.
kind of tough.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but you could try your city, some kind of a city rep and see what they've got on file. And then the county, but we could run an address for them, because if something has changed and it's remapped and all of a sudden it shows us a Z or an X zone, then that would be something we could first produce too.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they could maybe take that to the lender, and then if the lender says, yeah, but you've got to get an engineer out there or something, then that would be another step. But we would happily run the address for people.
Okay.
But that's been tough because we've had Mapleton. There was something that back before we had private flood insurance, and we, oh my goodness, we were trying to not have to buy an elevation certificate, and we had really had trouble, getting hold of some city official to help us.
Sure.
So
Because the cost of doing that is a fair amount, right?
yeah, like $800, I think. I don't, unless they've gone up, I don't know, but I think it's been like around $700 or $800.
Mhm.
And yeah, so if we can do it without that, that's good.
Good.
And you can just pay for with the private flood insurance, of course, if you have an A zone or an AE zone, whatever, B zone, you can just pay for that zone
Sure.
because you don't have an elevation certificate. But if for some reason you think you'd get a lesser price because of your actual elevation, which is just down to, like how they measure it, then if you have an elevation certificate, maybe with NFIP, you'd actually pay less.
Okay.
But I wouldn't probably spend the $800 if private's available and you
Great.
can get it at a reasonable rate.
Okay.
That makes sense. So yeah, we're thankful it didn't flood.
Great. Exactly.
We even had
Exactly.
in Valley City a few years ago, it rained a lot. Like they'll get that too. But anyways, and the city had dumped a bunch of dirt, like back, they were doing some project and they had left a bunch of dirt like out on the street, like a lot of dirt. Well, then the way it rained, it like ran up people's driveways instead of draining out into the street. I mean, it just didn't flood them, but it was, anyways, just kind of crazy.
Right.
The water goes where it wants to go.
It does. And with the wet fall, like you said, if that was a record,
Yeah.
typically our springs are,
Yeah.
a lot wetter than what we had. So we pretty much had the perfect melt and
Yes.
little
Yes.
rain. So
Yep. Yeah. The farmers, I think, are having trouble. It's so wet, but yeah. No,
yeah,
that's right. It was wonderful.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, if there isn't any other questions, Patty, anything else that we need?
Nope, we're good here.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate it, Robin. You are a wealth of information, and if anybody has any questions for Robin, just reach out. Oh,
Yeah. You know what? I just thought of one thing. I'm sorry.
okay.
And if people have left, that's okay. But when you do, if you do have an address for us, which is really, really helpful, I'm so sorry. If you know it's gonna be in an A zone or a V zone, so you know it's gonna need flood insurance, we would need the year that it's built, the style of the home, the square footage, like if it has a basement, the cost of the home. So like we've got those 12 questions, that I told you about for private, but those we have to have just a few of those to get a ballpark for
Okay.
people. So so a lot of times people will just, like I said, send us an address and say, hey, but if you know it's in a flood zone and you want a private flood insurance quote, we have to have that information. So it's helpful. I can look it up, but it's really helpful if you're writing and you already have a listing or, you've got the information available to you. That's really helpful if you include that in the email.
Okay.
The year built, the value, square footage, style of home, if there is a basement, if it's a twin home, that's helpful information for us. I think that's all.
Okay. Very good. Well, I appreciate it, Robin. It was nice to
Thank
see
you.
you again.
Thank you. You
And
too.
hopefully we can see each other in person soon.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. It's so nice
Yeah.
out. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.